Thank you and welcome to our webinar, our Teel Tech webinar with Matt Danner from Monolith Forensics. I'd like to introduce Matt and his awesome case management tool to the attendees. Just a little bit about myself. I've started working full-time here at Teel Technologies in January, and prior to that, I was with the Victoria Police Department here in Victoria, British Columbia. The last 3 years at the Victoria Police Department, I went through a period of time where I was looking through case management tools for our office and for the process of making sure our chain of custody was intact, and also to help us create some reports. And I looked at products, a variety of products, high end, low end. Some of them, can do a multitude of different things, but I always found that the products never were really quite appropriate for digital forensics and case management until the time where I came across Matt and his product and Monolith Forensics. So I highly recommend it. It's really streamlined our processes at the Victoria Police Department. It was easy to implement. Matt was always there, ready to answer any of our questions. And now that we're using it here in our lab at Teel Tech, it's been great. It's a godsend to be able to keep track of all these different exhibits. So I'm going to introduce Matt. I'm going to give him the screen. He can tell you a little bit about himself and the product, and we'll go from there. It's pretty informal.
Hello, and thanks, Roger, for that intro, and thanks to Teel Tech for hosting this webinar for me, so I can take some time to show off some of the features of Monolith and kind of discuss, the name of the webinar is, 3 strategies to reduce the load on your forensics lab, and what we're going to do is go through the software and, identify some common struggles that I see with a lot of forensics labs, and then go over how Monolith is trying to reduce that struggle a little bit and make your lab's life a little bit easier. So I'm going to share my screen just so we can get this. Got a very short PowerPoint here that I'm going to run through, and then what we're going to do is once we've kind of talked about a few things, we're going to hop into Monolith and show you kind of how we're trying to solve these issues that we've identified. So a little bit about me. Roger gave a pretty good intro, but I personally founded the company in 2019, and I actually built the first version of Monolith from scratch, from the ground up, and got my first customer. And we've had customers for a little over 2.5 years at this point. Every month we're picking up more and more customers that are using Monolith across. Mostly in the US, but we're picking up more and more customers throughout Europe, Canada, and Australia. So what Monolith is, it's primarily a cloud-based case evidence and analysis management platform specifically for digital forensics teams and e-discovery teams. So what that means is that by cloud-based is that usually every new customer, we start with the cloud-based platform, and then depending on their needs, if it's determined that they need to go with an on-premise deployment, then Monolith is available for on-premises deployments as well. It's a case-by-case basis, but we try to encourage everyone to use the cloud-based version of Monolith for various reasons. There's a lot of benefit to it. It's a lot less responsibility on the lab's part in terms of managing it and taking care of it. So it's what we always recommend to new customers. Prior to founding Monolith, I actually worked in this industry as well. I was a forensic consultant and analyst for about 10 years. During my time in that realm, I've pretty much worked on just about every type of forensics case you can think of. So I've been everything from I've worked on fraud cases and public integrity cases to capital murder cases where I've been, done a lot of work for law enforcement as a consultant, helping them with things like, processing their digital evidence for their cases when they didn't have a forensics lab or when they had overflow and things like that. I've also, worked in the private sector for several years, or I've done a ton of litigation work. I've done a ton of incident response work. And then on top of all of that, I've testified as an expert in forensics in multiple court jurisdictions across the country, um, you know, probably more than 24 times or so. So just the reason I explain that a lot in these presentations is just to give the audience an idea of like, I have experience in this area, I have this experience in this background, and I'm sort of leading the, when we build out new features in Monolith, when we work on the product, I'm using my experience to sort of decide what direction should go in. And that's how I talk to my customers as well, is it helps inform me to figure out what are the problems that a lot of forensic labs are running into, and what are some of the workflows that people are using, what are some of the patterns that we're seeing across a lot of these different labs, and then seeing if we can develop features to help streamline some of that stuff that everybody's doing. So in summary, we're going to cover here is, I cover 3 main areas. So one is going to be covering our evidence intake process, specifically for digital evidence and digital forensics labs. We're also going to cover our case reporting process, and then the process that we're using in our labs to collect and compile metrics. And then if we have time, we might cover some bonus content in Monolith and some Q&A if needed. So the first subject matter in this is going to be, what does our evidence intake look like? If we're running a digital forensics lab, what does that process look like? Usually it's a mostly manual process, meaning you have some kind of, somebody in your organization or outside your organization makes a request to your lab saying, we have a phone and we need some help processing it for evidence. It's usually manual in terms of like, there isn't usually an automated process that handles this for you. So it can be, the problem with the manual process is that it makes things kind of tedious, and it basically stops everything you're doing in the lab just to handle that intake. So more than likely, the way you've probably already tried to solve this is usually through using some kind of form. So if you're, you probably have either a handwritten form or a paper document that gets filled out by whoever's dropping the evidence off when they show up, or you may have even electronic PDF forms that you send out to all of your detectives and investigators and say, hey, fill this out and send it to us whenever you have a request. If you're really sophisticated, you may actually have maybe a SharePoint site or something in your agency-wide RMS system or something that can take in requests. I would say we rarely see that, but that is sometimes we do see that, where you have a more sophisticated setup where they actually do have an online request form. But the fact remains, though, is that once those requests come in, there is no process for dealing with all of that. It's still that even if you have an online form, or even if you have a PDF document that your users are filling out, it's still a manual process to take in that evidence and enter it into a place where you're recording everything. The other issue too is you have requests that may come from various sources. So if you don't have a SharePoint or something like that, or an RMS system that can handle this, usually you're getting requests through email, you're getting them from phone, you're getting them from just unannounced drop-ins where people are coming in to unannounced and just dropping off evidence, right? So that can be kind of hectic because it's hard to track where all your requests are coming in. It's hard to track, if someone says, hey, I never got a response, it's hard to go take a look at what intake you received and when it came in, and if anybody did anything with it. You also have another problem of requests come in from potentially dozens or hundreds of different people. So depending on the size of your lab, or just depending on your setup, what we see a lot of times is you may have a relatively small forensics lab that maybe has 3 forensic examiners, but they're kind of like, the only forensic lab in a 200-mile radius or something, or 250-mile radius. So what that means is that all these surrounding jurisdictions know that you exist, and they want to bring you evidence to help with their case. So what that means is that you've got potentially 3 examiners that have to do intake for, a dozen different agencies, with potentially 100 different requesters. And that can basically become an overwhelming task where basically you would almost need a full-time employee just to manage the intake for all those different agencies, so that you're not losing requests and that you have some way of keeping up with everything that's being requested. And then lastly, once the requests come in, you now have this arduous task of taking all this data and entering it somewhere, whether if you're using a spreadsheet or if you're using something else. Once you've gotten this information, you now have to record it somewhere. And for most of the labs that we talk to, this is like just a massive data entry task that everybody has to do. So you're entering data from all these different requests. So if we think about all these problems and we think about how do we make this better, how do we improve on this, how do we reduce this? This is one of the biggest loads I see on a lot of law enforcement labs. And it's like, how do we reduce this? Well, we have a system in Monolith that is designed specifically to try to solve this problem. And what I'm going to do now is hop over into Monolith and show you how we've approached this problem to this point. So what you're seeing here, this is I've got two tabs open here in a web browser. One is Monolith, and what I'm going to do is hide this bookmark bar. So we've got Monolith here, and then we've also got our Monolith request forms. So what Monolith comes with, every customer that signs up for a Monolith account, they also get a companion application. We just call it the Monolith request portal or Monolith request form. And what this is a place where your detectives, your various agencies and users can create accounts here and use this to submit forensic requests to your lab. So this would replace, like if you're using a PDF form or some other method to get requests from other agencies or even investigators within your own agency, this would replace that process. And the way it works is they log in, they click the submit requests button here, and it takes them to this relatively simple form, and then they fill it out. And what the investigator is going to do is they're going to tell you what their case number is. They're going to give you some kind of case name, which is usually just a description. So here we're kind of mocking, like, okay, let's say that we exist in the world of The Simpsons and we live inside the episode of Who Shot Mr. Burns, right? So Mr. Burns gets shot and the police collect some evidence items and they want your assistance as a forensics lab to help with that evidence. So they name it, case name, Who Shot Mr. Burns, case type, it's an assault. Here they're going to select who do we want to notify. So this is where this is a customizable list of emails that you can put in that you can say, okay, I'm going to notify this contact email address, or I'm going to notify Matt. I want to let them know that this is now when this request is submitted, an email will be sent out to this person letting them know, hey, we just requested some help with evidence. And then in the description here, we put up the description of everything related to the case, basically the background about what we know so far about Mr. Burns being shot. We've uploaded some evidence photos that we think might be relevant. And then down here, we've added in the different evidence items that we want to have examined. So this is where the user can come in and click add evidence and add as many evidence items as they need to. And once they have all this information entered, they're done with their request and they can click submit request. And what that's going to do is it's going to submit the request and it's going to reset the form so they can submit another request for different cases if they want. And then if we go over to our inquiry, we go over to Monolith. Monolith has an inquiries section that's dedicated specifically to this process. And if we refresh it, we'll see that we have a new request that's just come in. And I was logged in as myself in the form, so the client is showing up as me. But if we click on this request, here is the information that was just submitted by the user. So we have our evidence photos here. We have our evidence, the 3 evidence items that they mentioned, and with various information about each evidence item. And then we have information about who submitted the information to us and that sort of thing. So at this point, we've gotten the request. So now instead of getting an email or a phone call or some other method, we didn't even have to talk to this investigator yet. We haven't had to do anything. They just knew I'm going to go to the forensic lab request form. I'm going to enter the stuff, I'm going to enter the details about the evidence and the case that I'm working on and what I need from it. And then I'll wait for a response. So now you're in the lab, you see the response coming through an email, you check Monolith, you see here's the inquiry, you give it a review, you take a look at the evidence photos, you look at the evidence they submitted, maybe there's some additional information you need, so you email them back in response to the notification you just received, and you ask them some additional questions. Or if the evidence looks good, you can let them know, okay, like come by and drop off the evidence and we'll take it in. So once they've brought the evidence to you, you now get these 3 evidence items and you're now ready to create a full case from this. Now that you've received, and we always tell labs, keep everything as an inquiry until you've received the physical evidence or the logical evidence, whatever they're submitting to you for processing, because at this point, they've made the request, but you haven't gotten any, there's nothing to track just yet. There's no case details, there's nothing. All you're tracking is that you got a request at this point. So, but once they actually bring you some evidence, now you've got something that you have to start tracking. So what we can do here is from the inquiry, we can just say create a new case. And from this case, we'll say, we'll just call it Mr. Burns Teel Tech. Okay, we'll give that a case name. We'll leave the case number blank because we want Monolith to just automatically assign a case number. I'll select myself as the case lead. And then down here, we have some options in terms of what data we want to import into the case. So we're going to import those documents because it includes evidence photos, potentially. And we're going to include import evidence. And I'm going to change the received from to case agent. So what this is going to do, I'm going to do a couple of things. It's going to create a new case for us. It's going to automatically create evidence items for us. And each of those evidence items are going to now have a chain of custody record that matches this information here. And it's also going to move our documents into our case. So if we click on create case, Monolith does its work and automatically creates a case for us, and it generates a case number, and we can see it populate right here. And now if we want to go look at this case, we just click on this case here, it takes us straight to the case, and now we have a full-fledged case that we can start tracking and doing our full case management with. And if we navigate through the case, we can look at our evidence items, and we see that here are our 3 evidence items here. And then we can see all the details related to the evidence that we have at this point. We also have things like evidence details. So if we look at the full evidence details here, we have our chain of custody. So we already have a chain of custody record that's started for this evidence item that's started for us. And then if we look at our documents tab, we also have our 3 documents. So this sometimes is a search warrant that the user uploads. Sometimes it's evidence photos. It could be any, relatively small documents. But the purpose behind showing you this is to say, we identified these issues earlier of, okay, we have all these problems with our evidence intake process that right now is a completely manual process. But now, how do we make a system that solves this problem for us, or makes it to where it reduces the amount of load of work that we have to do? And the main point of this process is that the only thing that I did as a user was I just saw that a new inquiry came in and I clicked create case, and then I gave it a case name. That's really all that I did. All the data entry, all the other work was all done for me. I didn't have to do anything. So you can imagine if you have 100 different investigators that submit requests to your lab from time to time, in some cases may have 20 evidence items on it. You just, normally you have to manually enter all those 20 evidence items to record it in a spreadsheet or something along those lines to record that you received it. But what Monolith just did is it shifted that data entry burden from you as the lab person to the requester. So instead of 3 people doing data entry for 100 others, we've just flipped that, and now it's 100 people, basically doing the data entry for 3. And through this system, it just completely automates the whole system. And then if you need to, you can always edit the item. So we can edit this evidence item and make changes to it and add content if we need to. So yeah, so I'll end it there, but that's basically what I wanted to show in terms of solving that evidence intake process, is that what we want to do is make it as automated as possible, so that the next thing you need to worry about is not entering all this information for the evidence. The next thing to worry about is tackling your acquisitions and starting to extract data from your phones, starting to create forensic images of computers, or even if it's or just start processing that data in your favorite forensic tool. So now if we hop back over to our PowerPoint, and we'll move on to the next section here. So the next piece here is going to be our case reporting for forensics lab. So again, this is very specific to law enforcement, but a lot of times, when you're doing this forensics work, you want to be able to just quickly produce a report that just says, here's the evidence we received, here's what we did with it, and here's our notes, or here's our narrative of what this evidence is and what we did with it and what we found on it that's important. Or sometimes you just want to be able to create a quick report narrative template that you can start working on. So some of the issues that we see with this reporting process is that usually you're creating the same kind of reports over and over again. It's just usually like every report you generate has the same kind of content in it. You're just kind of creating it from scratch every time. Most labs may have some kind of report template that just has a basic header on it or something, and then they fill out the content in a Word document, and then they have to enter everything every time they create a new report. You usually have to manually enter evidence and case details. Even if you're using a template, you still have to manually enter like the case number, the evidence number, evidence name, serial number, make, model, possibly import evidence photos, things like that you're having to do manually every single time. So the issue with this that we see is that it's just a hard process to standardize, and it's a hard process to repeat effectively. So if you have 5 people in your lab, even with a report template, it can sometimes be hard to get people to do their reports the same way, especially if you're, generating these reports and then uploading them to an agency-wide RMS, or if you're just submitting these straight to the to the prosecutor with, things like cell write reports and things like that, where you are just generating some kind of memo that is serving as sort of the top of the stack in terms of all the data that you're providing to the investigator or to the prosecutor to review. So how can we solve this process? How can we make this easier on ourselves? Well, what it comes down to is we need to take, just like we did with the evidence intake process, we've got to take the manual parts of this process and try to automate them, wherever we can. Either we need some case reporting software, or we need some kind of, maybe Python scripts or something that can generate this for us. But realistically, what we need to do is try to take this manual process and filter it down to an automated or some kind of streamlined pipeline of some kind, where you can just repeat the process over and over again. So if we hop over to Monolith again, and we'll show you how we do this in Monolith. So if we have this same, if we take a look at our Mr. Burns case again, let's do a couple of things here. So we have our documents here. Let's upload some evidence photos for this item. So I'll just upload 2 evidence photos. This may take a second because these are high-res photos. There we go. Okay. So I uploaded a couple of photos for this evidence item, and this is item number 00049. So let's say that we need to produce a report for this evidence item here. We go over to our reports tab in Monolith, and we'll click on Start a Case Report. So case report name, say first report. And then this can just be any description. When we create our report, we can go into reports, And now we have all these different options for creating a report. And effectively, what this is really going to do is Monolith is going to generate a Word document for us that serves as a starting template. And we have our cover page, which will include all of our organizational details. We'll have a table of contents. We'll include our case summary details here. And what we'll do is we'll take off the evidence and documents list. And then we have our evidence details here. We'll just include one of these items. And we'll take off that, and that. Okay. And so now we've kind of set some of the options for our case report. And then we've got two things. We've got our case summary, which is just a customized place where you can put, it's a report summary. So if there's something specific to this report that you're trying to report on and you want it on that front page of the report, you can type it out here. And for now, we're going to leave that off just because it's not super important right now for this demonstration. And then if we go into our analysis, this is where you would write up your analysis narrative. And what we'll do is say, we'll just get some placeholder text. We can throw in here, and that way we have some content that'll show up in the report. And then lastly, we'll go to our generate case report. So what we'll do is just click on generate case report, and then Monolith will start creating a case report for us. So it's already finished. And what this did was it just compiled a bunch of information down into a Word document for us. And we'll go ahead and download this. And then I'll share my screen so you can see what this looks like. So we just generated a, so this is what the generated report looks like. So we have our cover page here that has our agency details on it. We have a nice table of contents over here that just lists the contents of the report for us. We have our case summary page here that has just details about our, who generated the reports, who did we do the report for. Here's our background of the case. So here's the case description. And then as we get further below, we have our analysis section where we've written out our analysis details. And this is where we put this data into the report analysis section where we're generating the report. And then we have our evidence details. So each of these evidence details items is just telling us something about the item here, including like here's thumbnails of the evidence photos for this particular item. And that's all. So that's all that this report has, because that's all that we selected in our options. But there's additional sections that we can go through and add to this report if we need to. But this is a pretty good standard report to start with, where if all you want to do is just create like a very basic report where you're just giving the case background, you have an analysis narrative that you've written, and then you want to include details about the evidence that's related to the report. You can just do this, and then you can format the document as much as you need. You can add additional content to it. But the purpose behind this is to create a foundation for your reporting that's reproducible, and that can be generated as many times as you need. And if we hop back into Monolith, we can see that we generated that report and it's still here. So we can either delete it or we can download it again, download it as many times as we want. We can also update our analysis. If we need to, we can add a report summary. We can also change the reporting options and then create another report if we want to. So the idea behind this is just to create a system where you don't have to create these reports from scratch every single time. Now, if we hop back over to our PowerPoint, we'll cover the last topic here, which is going to be our forensic lab metrics. So, most labs like to calculate or compile stats and metrics on what their lab is doing. It's usually pretty simple stuff like how many evidence items have we processed, how much data have we collected, things like that. But this process can be challenging because if you don't have a system in place that does this for you, putting together those metrics can be challenging because you have to take all the evidence items that you've collected. If you've got a spreadsheet where all this stuff is recorded, you put it in a spreadsheet. If you've got if you don't have a spreadsheet and you have some other system that doesn't make it easy to compile all your evidence items that you've collected in the last 3 months or something, that can be really challenging. And maybe in some cases, you might be spending a whole day dedicated to just putting this stuff together. And it's also highly dependent on where this data is being stored. So is it maybe if it's in a spreadsheet, it might be relatively easy to calculate these things. If it's not in a spreadsheet, if it's in another case management product or evidence system, it may not have the features available or the customization available to easily pull or calculate stats, based on cases and evidence and data and that sort of thing. So what we see with a lot of labs, this is usually a manual process by either the lab manager or by the examiners in the lab, where they usually have to manually go through all the evidence they've collected, all the cases they worked on, and start by hand recording what they've done, and then generate some kind of, just simple report, just saying, yeah, I worked on 10 evidence items in the last 2 weeks. Those 10 evidence items equated to this much data that generated this much content or whatever. And then it also, this process also kind of depends on like what metrics do you actually need. There's metrics that maybe your lab likes to see and to look at internally just for your own purposes. And then there's metrics that you maybe need to report to other people outside your lab, whether it's your agency executives, or maybe there's, maybe you get grant funding from another entity that you need to report metrics to, things like that, that kind of depend, that really, that's what sort of makes your metrics reporting change from one lab to the next. Is like, what do we need to report? Now, having said that, most of these metrics, what we see from a lot of labs is they usually have to report the same metrics. And even if there's metrics that they need to report that are very unique to them, usually Monolith is flexible enough that you can pull those metrics if you need to. So let's hop back into Monolith and see kind of how Monolith helps us with this sort of thing. So there's a couple of ways to pull metrics, depending on what you're doing. But just right off the bat, if we look at our main cases list, Monolith just tells us automatically kind of what we're working with. So we have a couple of stats up here automatically that are based on what we're seeing in our cases list right now. So this is an unfiltered list. So we're seeing this database has 1,300 plus cases in it. So we can see literally every case that we have entered in a Monolith in one place if we need to. And what this does is right here at the top, it's sort of giving us some basic stats about this data. So it's saying, we have amongst all of these cases, there's 1,098 evidence items, and there's 394 terabytes of data that's accumulated with these evidence items, and there's about 8 terabytes of collected data. And right now it's 194 cases per user, and it's spread across 15 organizations. And what we can do is, as we filter this stuff down, we can say, let's isolate cases that were opened in 2017. And now we have a quick metric, some metrics of what that looks like. And then additionally, what we can do is, if these metrics aren't good enough, we can export this table to an Excel sheet and then run our own analysis on that data. And then we've also got several columns here that we can look at. So we also have case open date. We've also got a case close date. We've got our last activity date as well. So we can look at all these things to kind of figure out, different ways of manipulating this data to get this sort of information that we want. We've also got like an acquisition total column, an acquisition count column, where we can look at, basically how many acquisitions do we have per case? Or instead of how many acquisitions, how much data have we collected per case? So we can see metrics like this. And This is a little bit more complicated way to do it, but if you need really granular, fine metrics, you can use the grid here to kind of help you do that, to generate a custom view that allows you to calculate different metrics at will. And we also have a similar thing for evidence items. So here we're looking at 500 evidence items, and the same thing with cases. We can apply, any kind of filter we want. We can isolate a certain client if we need to. So if we go to our case selector here, we can select organization. So this would be, this would tell us like, okay, this is evidence item that we collected for this organization. So we've got Springfield Nuclear Plant. So if we wanted to look, divide these items up by Springfield Nuclear Plant, we can do that and say, okay, out of those 500 items, there's 10 evidence items here for this particular agency that we did work for. And this is very similar to the cases grid, where we can play with these different values. We can hide and show different columns and kind of create a customized view, and then add different filters, and then export this out to an Excel sheet that we can then do even more analysis with if we want to. So the idea here is that you can just about generate any kind of custom metric you want for evidence and cases. So that's sort of the first way to do this kind of metrics compilation in Monolith, which is a much more manual process, but the trade-off here is, it's more manual, but you can also get a much more customized set of metrics if you want. The other way to do it is Monolith has pre-built metrics reports that you can pull. So when we look at our case reporting here, right now we have 5 different pre-made report metrics reports that you can generate. So we have a cases report, evidence, storage, quality assurance, and acquisitions. So when we look at each of these reports, we can say we'll look at our all evidence as an example. So what this is doing is this is pulling metrics about every single evidence item that's entered into this database in Monolith. And it's giving us some very basic metrics that we can easily just, digest. So a couple of things it's telling us, okay, we're looking at, it's pulling data related to 16,000 plus evidence items. It's telling us that for new evidence items, we've got 7.8 terabytes of data that we've acquired. For evidence items that are marked as released, that we've already released from our lab, we have 1.6 terabytes of collected data. Out of all this data, we have 12 evidence items that are marked as released. So that's just a matter of allows you to partition the evidence data a little bit, where you can switch between, released items and all items basically. And what we're seeing here in our compositional metrics are just the breakdown of here's the breakdown of our evidence types. So out of 16,000 items, we've got 3,300 smartphones, 3,100 external hard drives, 3,100 laptops. And the same thing here for brands. You can look at the breakdown of the type of the manufacturer of devices that are coming in, or the service provider if you're dealing with cloud-based accounts. You also have the software used column, which tells you this was the software we used to collect data from evidence items. So in this database, we can see 38.5% of our data was collected using FTK Imager. And then we've got, 18.2% was collected using UFED for PC. And then if we don't like the charts, if we want to see just the tabular data, we can switch over to our text view and actually see the actual numerical breakdown of all of these different charts. And then lastly, if we want to take all this information and report it to somebody, we can generate these Excel documents. And when we click Save Report, what it does is it creates a document. It creates an Excel file that compiles all of this information that we're looking at into an Excel document. So what this means, I'll switch over to this so you can see it. So we now have an Excel document that lists out all of these metrics for us so that we can provide this to someone, or once it's generated, you can format it, you can edit it, reduce it down to just the stats that you want. And then down here, we also have a report of the actual evidence items that are included in this report. So we can see a list of, this tab, for example, has 16,000 rows in it, because this is all the evidence items that are being used to calculate these metrics. Then we have this separate tab for evidence items showing, these are the evidence items that have been released amongst this data set. And then we have just our different metrics here that we saw in the actual Monolith UI. So that's an example of the evidence report, but we've also got a few other reports here. So we have a cases report. And the way these work is you can add different filters. So depending on what kind of data you're looking at, if we select our cases overview, we can select a time interval. So we can say, like, let's look at all our case data from last year. We select the time dimension that we want this interval to be based on. So we can do either case close date or case open date. And select case open date. And then we can also filter by organization. Let's say that, we want to send a report to one of our partner agencies to say, hey, here's all the cases that we worked for you last year. Well, we can select an organization to say we want to tell the Gotham Police Department, here's all the cases that we worked on for them in the previous year. And we can even select case types too. We can say we want to tell them, here's all the assault cases that we worked on for them last year. Here, I'll just leave it with these, and then we'll create this report. Oh, should give the name. Say case report. So now we're seeing, there's only one case here because I filtered it down so much to where there's really nothing. There's only one case that resulted. But the point is if we put in these metrics, we're saying for the 2021 year, based on the case open date within that range, we want to see all the cases that we worked on for the Gotham Police Department. And in this case, it just ended up being one case. And we can look at that one case and see it right here. And we see, the metrics in terms of, okay, it's marked as active still, and it's a null case type, so it doesn't have a case type assigned to it. But that's basically how these reports work. And you can pull them for cases, you can pull them for acquisitions. So here's what an acquisition report looks like. So you can see details about data that you've collected from various evidence items, and then compile these down to Excel documents. So that's how Monolith approaches metrics reporting for forensics labs, and we're adding new reports to this all the time. We've actually got 2 new reports that are coming out in the next major update to manage metrics for 2 other types of activity that goes on in Monolith. But we're always working on adding additional reports to this as customers give us feedback on what they're looking for. So that's pretty much it. Those are the 3 topics that I wanted to cover. It's usually easier to digest 2 to 3 main topics in presentations like this, and just see kind of how we kind of tackle those challenges that we're running into. And that's what we're trying to do with Monolith at this company, is we try to identify, okay, what are the problem sets in different forensics labs, and what can we do with software to help solve those different problems. And then try to find a solution that makes it easier. So with that, I'll give it back over to Roger and let him kind of end us out, and then we'll see if there's any. I don't think there's any Q&A, but yeah, that's it. So thanks everyone for joining, and again, please reach out if you're interested in the software, or reach out to the folks at Teel Tech as well, and just let us know.
That's awesome, Matt. Thanks a lot for that overview. The metrics has grown exponentially. As you were talking about them and doing the demo, I was actually looking at a couple of the metrics on our side, and very, very handy. It looks like some people weren't able to join our webinar today, which is quite okay. I mean, as demands come and go, people get busy at work. I mean, the good part about it is it's going to be available. We're going to be able to upload it and let our partners have a view at it, and potentially we'll get lots of questions as a result of that. But once again, thanks a lot for the time. Thanks a lot for the support that you offer. It's always good working with you, and I look forward to doing a couple more of these.
Sure. Well, thanks, Roger. I appreciate it. And thanks for setting us up, and I appreciate the time. And thanks to everybody who watches this. Thanks for giving it a watch, and just let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Matt. I'll touch base with you a little bit later. And thanks a lot for the time today.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Cheers.